The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a soft hiss, revealing towering crystalline structures that reached toward a domed ceiling painted with swirling nebulae. Ambassador Kim Ji-won stepped through first, her black military uniform a stark contrast against the shimmering walls that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Behind her walked General Park Miho, his weathered face showing no emotion as hundreds of alien eyes turned to observe the human delegation. The chamber fell into hushed whispers as they made their way to the designated seating area. Kim Ji-won could hear the condescending murmurs in a dozen different languages and communication methods. Some aliens spoke in musical tones, others in clicking sounds, and a few communicated through color changes in their skin. All of them seemed amused by the arrival of the humans. "Look at them," hissed a Veltar representative, its diamond-like body catching the chamber's light and throwing rainbow patterns across nearby walls. "So small and fragile. How did such creatures even survive long enough to reach the stars?" Another alien, this one resembling a walking tree with silver bark, rustled its leaves in what passed for laughter among its species. "I heard they still use projectile weapons." "Projectiles? How wonderfully primitive." Kim Ji-won adjusted her uniform and sat down, her back straight and eyes forward. She had dealt with diplomatic condescension before, but never on this scale. The Galactic Council represented 47 different species, and from what she could see, none of them took humanity seriously. The center of the chamber began to glow, and a figure materialized on the raised platform. Council Prime Velthara was magnificent to behold, her crystalline form standing nearly 3 meters tall, with faceted surfaces that reflected light in impossible ways. When she spoke, her voice resonated through the chamber like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Esteemed representatives," Velthara began, her words somehow heard clearly despite the chamber's vast size, "we face an unprecedented threat. The Zephyrian Empire has begun aggressive expansion toward our outer rim colonies. Their battle fleets have already conquered 3 systems, and intelligence reports indicate they are moving toward the Kepler 442 system." Murmurs of concern rippled through the assembled delegates. Kim Ji-won had read the briefings on the Zephyrians. They were a warrior species that had built their empire through conquest, with technology that rivaled any in the galaxy. Their ships were fast, their weapons devastating, and their soldiers were said to be fearless in battle. "We must respond immediately," Velthara continued. "Defense assignments have been calculated based on each species' capabilities and technological advancement." She gestured, and a holographic display appeared above the chamber, showing ship deployments and defensive positions. Kim Ji-won watched as various alien species were assigned crucial roles. The Luminari, beings of pure energy who could interface directly with ship systems, were given control of orbital defense platforms. The Veltar, with their nearly indestructible crystalline bodies, would lead ground assault operations. General Park Miho stood slowly, his movement drawing attention from across the chamber. At barely 1.8 meters tall, he looked small compared to most of the alien delegates, but there was something in his bearing that commanded respect. "What's Earth's assignment, Prime?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic design. Velthara's form shifted slightly, colors playing across her crystalline surface. "Support operations," she announced, and Kim Ji-won could hear the barely concealed amusement in her voice. "Your species will provide additional numbers while the Luminari handle orbital defense and the Veltar manage strategic operations." The reaction was immediate. Alien delegates throughout the chamber began what could only be described as laughter, though it took many forms. The energy beings pulsed with bright colors, crystalline species chimed like bells, and organic species made various sounds of amusement. "Support operations," repeated a delegate from the back of the chamber. How delightfully diplomatic. Kim Ji-won felt her jaw clench, but she maintained her composure. She had expected this. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, and they were still seen as the newcomers who had barely mastered faster-than-light travel. Most alien species viewed humans as crude, numerous, and ultimately expendable. General Park nodded once, his expression never changing. "Understood. The 7th Combined Arms Division will deploy to Kepler 442 within 72 hours. 72 hours? Velthara seemed surprised. "That's remarkably fast for your species' logistics capabilities." "We're efficient when we need to be," Park replied simply. As the council session concluded and delegates began filing out, Kim Ji-won overheard Velthara's aide whisper to another council member, 7,000 human soldiers against a Zephyrian battle fleet? They'll be extinct within a week. Perhaps we should prepare memorial preparations now to save time later." Park overheard the comment as well, but his expression never changed. He had seen that look before, heard those dismissive words. Throughout human history, enemies had made the same mistake, viewing humanity as weak, disorganized, or primitive. It never ended well for them. On the transport ship back to Earth, Colonel Lee Salmon pulled out her tablet and began reviewing deployment orders. The cabin was quiet except for the hum of the ship's engines as they accelerated toward the Sol system. "General," she said finally, "the Council expects us to fail. They've essentially assigned us as cannon fodder while the advanced species handle the real fighting." Park looked out the viewport at the stars streaming past. "Let them think that, Colonel. Wars aren't won by expectations or superior attitudes. They're won by professionals who understand their job and do it well." The massive Zephyrian war fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a dark storm cloud above the peaceful planet of Kepler 442b. Admiral Zefkul stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue and green world spin slowly below them. His insect-like mandibles clicked together in a sound that his crew knew meant he was pleased and excited. "Admiral," his intelligence officer reported, turning from his console with confidence, "our scouts confirmed the reports. Only token resistance on the surface. A few thousand primitive human soldiers and some scattered alien defense units. Nothing that should delay us more than a few hours." Zefkul's 4 arms moved in a gesture of satisfaction. For 300 years, his species had expanded across the galaxy using the same successful strategy. Arrive with overwhelming force, demonstrate superior firepower, accept the inevitable surrender and move on to the next target. It had worked on 47 different worlds and against dozens of species. "Excellent," the Admiral said, his voice carrying the authority of countless victories. "Begin planetary bombardment. Target their military installations first, then their population centers. I want them to understand the futility of resistance before we land our ground forces." The weapons officer, a younger Zephyrian with bright green chitin covering his arms, activated the firing controls. Bombardment commencing in 3, 2, 1. The flagship's main cannon charged up with a deep humming sound that vibrated through the ship's hull. But before it could fire, every alarm on the bridge began screaming at once. Red lights flashed, and the ship's defensive systems activated automatically. "What is happening?" Zefkul demanded, his mandibles clicking rapidly in confusion. His tactical officer stared at his screens in disbelief. "Sir, we're detecting coordinated defensive fire from 17 different positions on the planet's surface. All targeting our ship simultaneously." "Impossible," Zefkul snarled. "Intelligence said they were primitives with basic weapons." The first salvo hit the flagship's shields with devastating precision. These weren't random desperate shots fired by frightened defenders. Each projectile struck exactly where it would do the most damage to shield generators and power systems. The ship shuddered violently, throwing several crew members to the floor. "Shields down to 60%, the damage control officer reported, his voice tight with worry. On the planet's surface, Sergeant Kim Dae-hoon crouched in his carefully prepared position, speaking calmly into his radio headset. Around him, his squad of artillery spotters worked with practiced efficiency, calculating ranges and coordinating with units across the continent. "Fire Direction Center, this is Observer 1, Kim spoke clearly. "Enemy Dreadnought, grid reference 447 to 882. Fire mission over." The voice that responded came through crystal clear, despite being transmitted from an artillery battery 50 kilometers away. "Observer 1, Fire Direction Center. Shot over." "Shot out," Kim confirmed, then switched channels to warn friendly forces. All units. Splash in 30 seconds. Take cover." 30 seconds later, the sky above the Zephyrian flagship erupted in a perfectly coordinated barrage. Projectiles arrived from multiple directions, each one timed to hit within milliseconds of the others. The combined impact overwhelmed the ship's defensive systems completely. Admiral Zefkul watched his shield displays collapse to zero and felt his mighty dreadnought shake like a leaf in a hurricane. "How are they doing this?" he whispered, staring at the tactical display that showed human positions across the planet working together like pieces of a single machine. What he was witnessing was something no Zephyrian had ever encountered before. Every human unit on the planet was connected through a communication network that allowed instant coordination. When one unit spotted a target, others could engage it within seconds. When one position came under attack, supporting units provided covering fire automatically. Captain Han Eugen's armored vehicles moved across the northern plains in perfect formation, their timing coordinated with Lieutenant Park Jinwa's aircraft flying overhead. As the tanks advanced, the aircraft cleared enemy positions ahead of them. As the aircraft completed their attack runs, the tanks provided anti-aircraft protection. Meanwhile, Major Co. Hyugin's infantry units moved through the southern forests, securing positions that would prevent enemy reinforcements from reaching the main battle area. They didn't charge forward seeking individual glory or personal honor. Instead, each soldier understood their role in a larger plan and executed it with professional precision. The Zephyrian ground forces, when they finally landed, found themselves facing something completely unexpected. Human soldiers didn't fight like the warriors they had faced on other worlds. These humans didn't break when their leaders fell. They didn't retreat when outnumbered. They didn't surrender when surrounded. Instead, they fought with a cold, calculating efficiency that terrified the veteran Zephyrian troops. When a human squad leader was killed, the next soldier in line immediately took command and continued the mission exactly as planned. When ammunition ran low, supply units appeared as if by magic to resupply them. When casualties mounted, medical units evacuated the wounded while replacement soldiers filled their positions seamlessly. By the end of the first day, Admiral Zefkul stared at his casualty reports in shocked disbelief. His advance fleet had lost 18 ships, including 2 heavy cruisers and a battle carrier. His ground forces had been pushed back to their landing zones and were requesting immediate evacuation. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "the other fleet commanders are requesting permission to withdraw beyond the outer system." Zefkul's mandibles clicked slowly as he processed this information. In 3 centuries of conquest, the Zephyrian Empire had never been forced to retreat from a planet they had chosen to attack. They had faced brave warriors, advanced technology, and desperate defenders. But they had never encountered anything like these humans. "Grant permission," he said finally. "Signal all ships to withdraw." As the Zephyrian fleet limped away from Kepler 442b, Admiral Zefkul realized they had encountered something entirely new in the galaxy. Not warriors seeking glory, not defenders fighting for survival, but something far more dangerous. Professional soldiers who treated war as a science rather than an art. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called at 3 hours past midnight, Galactic Standard Time. Representatives from 47 different species filled the Great Chamber, their various forms creating a bizarre collection of shapes, colors, and sizes. The air hummed with tension as holographic displays projected impossible images from the recent battle at Kepler 442. Prime Velthara stood at the center of the chamber, her crystalline body reflecting the light from the battle footage in fractured rainbows across the walls. Her usual calm composure had been replaced by something that looked remarkably like confusion, even fear. "Explain this," she demanded, her voice resonating through the chamber with sharp, urgent tones. She gestured toward a holographic display showing human soldiers continuing to fight with deadly efficiency even after losing nearly 1/3 of their forces. "This should be impossible. No known species in the galaxy can maintain combat effectiveness after such catastrophic losses." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled delegates. The footage showed something that violated everything they understood about military psychology and battlefield behavior. When most species lost 30% of their forces, the survivors either fled in panic or surrendered to avoid complete annihilation. A Veltar representative, his diamond-like body glittering with agitation, spoke up. "Our own warriors are among the bravest in the galaxy. But even we would retreat after such losses to regroup and plan a counterattack. These humans just continued fighting as if nothing had happened." General Park Miho walked slowly to the center of the chamber. His simple military uniform looked plain and unremarkable compared to the exotic forms surrounding him, but something in his bearing commanded attention from every delegate present. The chamber fell silent as he stopped before the main display. "You asked what makes human military different," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "The answer is simple: we are professionals." A luminary representative, its energy form pulsing with bright yellow colors that indicated skepticism, interrupted. "All species have warriors. The Zephyrians have warriors. We have warriors. Even the peaceful Altarians have warriors when threatened. What makes humans special?" Park turned to face the energy being directly. "No," he said firmly. "You have warriors. We have soldiers. There is a fundamental difference that your species have never understood." He activated a control panel, and the holographic display changed to show detailed footage from the recent battle. The assembled delegates watched as human forces moved across the battlefield with mechanical precision, each unit supporting the others in ways that seemed almost supernatural. "Warriors fight for honor," Park continued, highlighting a group of Zephyrian soldiers who had charged heroically but uselessly against prepared human positions. They fight for glory, for personal achievement, for survival, for revenge. Their motivation is emotional, personal, individual. The display shifted to show human forces coordinating a complex defensive maneuver. Soldiers fight because it is their job. Their motivation is professional, systematic, collective. He pointed to a specific section of the battlefield. Captain Lee Sunho's company held grid 447 for 6 hours yesterday. They were outnumbered 4-1. They were under constant artillery bombardment. They had no hope of reinforcement or relief. The chamber watched in fascination as the footage showed the human company maintaining their position despite overwhelming odds. Soldiers fell, positions were overrun and retaken, ammunition ran low, but the humans never broke. They did not hold that position because they were brave, Park explained, though his voice carried obvious respect for the soldiers. Though they were very brave. They did not hold because they hated the enemy, though some of them did. They held because their mission required it, and professionals complete their missions regardless of personal cost. An Altarian delegate, resembling a tall plant with silver leaves, rustled with confusion. But surely when their leader fell, they would have retreated or sought new orders? Park smiled grimly and changed the display again. Watch what happened when Captain Lee Sunho was killed by enemy fire at hour 3 of the engagement. The footage showed the moment when the captain fell, struck down by a Zephyrian energy weapon while directing his troops. For a moment, the alien delegates expected to see the human formation collapse as leaderless soldiers fled or surrendered. Instead, they watched Sergeant Yang Minyuk immediately step forward and continue giving orders exactly as the captain had been doing. His voice was calm, his commands clear and precise. The other soldiers obeyed without question or hesitation. When the captain fell, Sergeant Yang Minyuk assumed command and continued the mission exactly as planned, Park narrated. He had been trained to do this. Every human soldier is trained to step up when their superiors fall. The display showed another moment, 2 hours later, when the sergeant was also killed during a particularly intense enemy assault. Again the delegates expected chaos. Again they were disappointed. When Sergeant Yang fell, Corporal Kang Jihun took over, Park continued. The mission continued without pause. Every soldier in that company understood not just their individual role, but how their role fit into the larger operation. Prime Velthara's crystalline form flickered with colors that indicated deep confusion. But how do they maintain discipline after such losses? How do they continue fighting when their friends, their leaders, their comrades are dead around them? The question hung in the air. Every delegate in the chamber leaned forward, waiting for the answer that might explain this impossible human behavior. Park looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes or optical sensors of as many delegates as possible before responding. His answer was simple, but it carried the weight of human military tradition going back thousands of years. Because, he said quietly, warfare is not personal to us. It is professional. The chamber fell completely silent as the implications of those words sank in. These humans did not fight wars the way other species did. They had turned fighting into a job, a skill, a science rather than an emotional response to threat or opportunity. Admiral Zefkul's 4 eyes stared at the tactical display screen in his command center, and for the first time in his long military career, he felt something he had never experienced before: genuine fear. The holographic representation of the Colony Prime system showed his fleet surrounded by human forces in what could only be described as a perfect trap. "This is impossible," he whispered, his mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. "How did we get into this position?" His tactical officer, a young Zephyrian named Kethvar, worked frantically at his console. His green chitin was pale with worry as he tried to understand what had gone wrong with their battle plan. "Admiral, 6 hours ago we had them surrounded. Our fleet was in perfect position to begin the siege of Colony Prime. Now somehow they have us surrounded instead." The Admiral moved closer to the display, studying the positions of human ships and ground installations. They formed a nearly perfect circle around his fleet, with overlapping fields of fire that would make escape extremely costly. But what disturbed him most was how precisely the humans had predicted exactly where his ships would be. "How did they predict our movements?" Kethvar asked, his voice shaking with nervous energy. "We followed standard Zephyrian siege doctrine exactly. There was no way they could have known our next moves. What the Zephyrians could not know was that 3 weeks earlier, Colonel Nam Ji-hyun had been sitting in a small office deep underground in the human command bunker, surrounded by data tablets and holographic displays. She had been working 18-hour days, studying every recorded Zephyrian battle from the past 3 centuries. Her small team of analysts had been breaking down Zephyrian tactics, looking for patterns that their enemies might not even realize they followed. "Look at this," she had told her assistant, pointing to a series of battle recordings. In every siege situation, the Zephyrians always position their command ship in the same relative location. Always in the rear center, exactly 50,000 kilometers from the target planet. They do this because their battle doctrine was written 400 years ago, and they have never changed it. Her assistant had been amazed. "You mean they always do the same thing?" "Exactly," Nam Ji-hyun had replied. "They are very good at what they do, but they do it the same way every single time. If we can predict their moves, we can prepare countermoves in advance." Now, as Admiral Zefko realized he had walked directly into a trap, Colonel Nam Ji-hyun was proven correct. The humans had not just guessed where the Zephyrian fleet would be. They had calculated it with mathematical precision based on centuries of enemy behavior patterns. Deep in his underground command center, General Park Miho studied the same tactical display that was causing Admiral Zefko such distress. But instead of fear, Park's face showed calm satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. "All units report ready for Operation Hammer," his communications officer announced. Park nodded once. "Execute Operation Hammer." The order went out simultaneously to 17 different human military units positioned around the colony prime system. Major Kim Soo-jin received the order at her artillery command post and immediately began the bombardment sequence her crews had practiced dozens of times. Her guns opened fire at precisely the moment specified in the operation plan, not a second early or late. Captain Oh Min-ji's armored battalion received the same order and began their advance through the asteroid field where intelligence had predicted the weakest point in Zephyrian defenses. His tanks moved in perfect formation, each driver knowing exactly where to go and when to get there. Lieutenant Colonel Park Yuna launched her aerospace fighters at the exact moment when Zephyrian fighter patrols would be changing shifts, leaving a brief gap in their defensive coverage. Her pilots attacked with surgical precision, targeting specific enemy ships in a predetermined order. The Zephyrian fleet found itself under attack from multiple directions at once, but this was not the chaotic battle they were used to fighting. Instead, every human action seemed to support every other human action. When the artillery barrage forced Zephyrian ships to move to avoid being hit, they moved directly into the path of the advancing human armor. When they tried to launch fighters to counter the armor, Park Yuna's pilots were waiting in exactly the right position to intercept them. Admiral Zefko watched his carefully planned siege fall apart in a matter of hours. His ships were being destroyed not by superior human technology, which was actually quite primitive compared to Zephyrian equipment, but by superior human planning and coordination. "Admiral," his weapons officer called out, "their attacks are too precise. They know exactly where we are going to be before we get there." What truly terrified the Zephyrians was not human courage or strength or advanced weapons. Many species in the galaxy were brave, strong, and well-armed. What terrified them was human calculation. Every human action served a specific purpose in a larger plan. Every human sacrifice moved them closer to a strategic objective. Every human victory was measured not by glory gained, but by progress toward final victory. Kethvar stared at his tactical screen in growing panic. "Admiral, they are not just trying to win this battle. They are fighting as if this battle is just one small part of a much larger war." The young officer was more correct than he knew. Human military doctrine did not focus on individual battles or personal heroics. It focused on achieving strategic objectives through systematic, coordinated effort over time. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, his voice shaking with disbelief, "they are not fighting to win battles. They are fighting to win the war." Admiral Zefko looked at his display one more time, seeing his proud fleet trapped like insects in a carefully constructed web. For the first time in his career, for the first time in Zephyrian military history, he gave an order he had never imagined he would give. "All ships," he announced over the fleet communication system, "retreat immediately. Full withdrawal from the colony prime system." The Zephyrian Empire, which had conquered 47 worlds in 3 centuries, was retreating from a system they had already claimed as conquered. The Galactic Council chambers looked remarkably different than they had 6 months earlier. Where once there had been only alien seating designed for crystalline bodies, energy beings, and various exotic life forms, now there were simple chairs and desks clearly built for human proportions. The message was clear to everyone who entered: humanity was no longer considered a minor species that could be ignored or dismissed. General Park Miho walked to the central podium with measured steps, his military boots clicking softly on the polished floor. The chamber was packed with delegates from 47 different species, but the atmosphere was completely different from his first visit. Gone were the condescending whispers and barely concealed laughter. In their place was something Park had rarely seen directed toward humans. Genuine respect mixed with curiosity and in some cases, fear. Ambassador Kim Ji-won sat in the front row, watching as alien delegates pulled out recording devices and data tablets. Many of them had brought military advisors who were taking careful notes. She smiled slightly as she recognized the behavior. These were not beings preparing to dismiss human concerns. These were beings preparing to learn. Esteemed representatives, Park began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustic systems, I am here to report on the current status of the conflict with the Zephyrian Empire. The chamber fell completely silent. Even species that communicated through color changes or electrical fields seemed to pause their constant background chatter. 3 days ago, the Zephyrian Empire contacted our diplomatic corps through neutral intermediaries, Park continued. They have formally requested peace negotiations to end all hostilities between the Zephyrian Empire and the Terran Federation. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the assembled delegates. The Zephyrians had been expanding their empire for over 3 centuries, conquering every species they encountered. The idea that they would request peace negotiations was almost unthinkable. Prime Velthara's crystalline form caught the chamber's light as she leaned forward. General Park, what reasons did they give for this unexpected request? Park consulted his data tablet, though he had memorized the message long before entering the chamber. They cite, and I quote, incompatible military philosophies as grounds for cessation of hostilities. The exact phrase they used was that continued conflict would result in unacceptable losses for uncertain gains. A Veltar representative, his diamond-like body glittering with agitation, spoke up. General, our military observers have been studying the recordings from your recent engagements. Your tactics seem remarkably systematic compared to how other species conduct warfare. Could you explain this difference? Park nodded, having expected this question. The difference is fundamental. Other species in the galaxy fight as individuals, even when they are part of larger groups. Each warrior seeks personal glory, individual achievement, or personal survival. He activated the chamber's holographic display system, showing footage from recent human military exercises. The delegates watched as human soldiers moved in perfect coordination, each unit supporting the others in complex patterns that seemed almost choreographed. Humans fight as professionals, Park continued. We have had thousands of years to perfect military science while fighting wars against other humans. We have learned through bitter experience that wars are not won by individual heroes or glorious charges. Wars are won by logistics, coordination, and systematic application of military doctrine. Throughout the chamber, alien representatives were frantically taking notes. The concepts Park was describing were completely foreign to species that viewed warfare as either a test of individual courage or a chaotic struggle for survival. A luminary energy being pulsed with curious yellow light as it spoke. General, we have already submitted a formal request for human military advisors to help us understand these concepts you call logistics and coordination. Are there other species making similar requests? Park glanced at his aide, Colonel Lee Salmon, who consulted her own data tablet. 17 different species have submitted formal requests for various forms of military cooperation, she reported. The Veltar want to establish exchange programs with our staff colleges. The Altarians are requesting human observers for their defense planning. Even the peaceful Meridians want to understand what they call human strategic thinking. Ambassador Kim Ji-won watched the alien delegates with growing amusement. She could see them struggling to understand concepts that humans took for granted. Military terms like operational art, strategic depth, and combined arms doctrine were being translated into dozens of different languages, but the translations often failed to capture the full meaning. An elderly Altarian delegate, his silver leaves rustling with confusion, asked, General Park, when you say that humans have industrialized warfare, what exactly do you mean? Park considered his answer carefully. Most species treat war as an extension of individual combat. They scale up personal fighting to group fighting, but the basic approach remains the same. Humans have learned to treat war as a science. We study it, analyze it, develop systematic approaches to it. We have schools dedicated to teaching warfare, just as we have schools for engineering or medicine. The implications of this statement seemed to hit the delegates all at once. Several alien representatives began speaking urgently to their aides. The Zephyrians, despite their centuries of conquest, had never faced an enemy that treated warfare as a professional discipline rather than an emotional response. After the formal session ended, Colonel Lee Salmon approached Park with a smile on her face. "Sir, we just received another request. The Andromedans want a human military attaché assigned to their defense council. Apparently, word about our professionalism is spreading faster than we expected." Park nodded as he watched the alien delegates file out of the chamber. Their body language had changed completely from 6 months ago. Where once they had moved with casual dismissal of human concerns, now they moved with the careful attention of beings who recognized they had encountered something entirely new and potentially dangerous. "Schedule the deployment, Colonel," Park said quietly. "It seems the galaxy has some learning to do about how warfare really works." As the last alien delegate left the chamber, Park reflected on the dramatic change that had occurred. The galaxy had spent thousands of years assuming that bigger, stronger, or more technologically advanced always meant militarily superior. Now they were discovering that systematic thinking and professional organization could defeat raw power and individual heroics. The age of warrior species was ending. The age of military professionals had begun.